They knew rulership and princeship among the Arabs. When talking about the Arabs before Islam, we deem it necessary to draw a mini picture of the history of rulership, princeship, sectarianism, and the religious dominations of the Arabs, so as to facilitate the understanding of emergent circumstances when Islam appeared. When the sun of Islam rose, rulers of Arabia were of two kinds: crowned kings, who were in fact not independent, and heads of tribes and clans, who enjoyed the same authorities and privileges possessed by crowned kings, and were mostly independent, though some of whom could have shown some kind of submission to a crowned king. The crowned kings were only those of Yemen, Hira and Ghassan. All other rulers of Arabia were non-crowned. Rulership in Yemen. The folks of Sheba were one of the oldest nations of the pure Arabs who lived in Yemen. Excavations at Ar brought to light their existence 25 centuries BC. Their civilization flourished, and their domain spread 11 centuries BC. It is possible to divide their ages according to the following estimation. 1. The centuries before 650 BC, during which their kings were called Makhrib, Sheba. Their capital was Sawa, also known as Kriba, whose ruins lie in a spot a day's walk from the western side of Marib. During this period, they started building the Dam of Marib, which had great importance in the history of Yemen. Sheba was also said to have had so great a domain that they had colonies inside and outside Arabia. 2. From 650 BC until 115 BC. During this era, they gave up the name Makhrib and assumed the designation of kings of Sheba. They also made Marib their capital instead of Sawa. The ruins of Marib lie at a distance of 60 miles east of Sana'a. 3. From 115 BC until 300 AD. During this period, the tribe of Himyar conquered the kingdom of Sheba and took Redan for capital instead of Marib. Later on, Redan was called Zifar. Its ruins still lie on Mudawar mountain near the town of Yarim. During this period, they began to decline and fall. Their trade failed to a very great extent, firstly, because of the Nabatean domain over the north of Hijaz. Secondly, because of the Romans' superiority over the naval trade routes after the Roman conquest of Egypt, Syria, and the north of Hijaz. And thirdly, because of the intertribal warfare. Thanks to the three above-mentioned factors, families of Qahtan were disunited and scattered out. 4. From 300 AD until Islam dawned on Yemen. This period witnessed a lot of disorder and turmoil. The great many in civil wars rendered the people of Yemen liable to foreign subjection and hence loss of independence. During this era, the Romans conquered Adn and even helped the Abyssinians Ethiopians to occupy Yemen for the first time in 340 AD, making use of the constant intra-tribal conflict of Hamdan and Himyar. The Abyssinian-Ethiopian occupation of Yemen lasted until 378 AD, whereafter Yemen regained its independence. Later on, cracks began to show in Marib Dam, which led to the Great Flood, 450 or 451 AD. Mentioned in the Noble Kur? 14. Msa Niu. This was a great event which caused the fall of the entire Yemeni civilization and the dispersal of the nations living therein. In 523, Dunawas, a Jew, dispatched a great campaign against the Christians of Najran in order to force them to convert into Judaism. Having refused to do so, they were thrown alive into a big ditch where a great fire had been set. The Qur referred to this event. Cursed were the people of the ditch. Al-Quran 85:4. This aroused great wrath among the Christians and especially the Roman emperors, who not only instigated the Abyssinians Ethiopians against Arabs, but also assembled a large fleet which helped the Abyssinian Ethiopian army of 70,000 warriors to effect a second conquest of Yemen in 525 AD, under the leadership of Iriat, who was granted rulership over Yemen. a position he held until he was assassinated by one of his army leaders, Ar Raheeq, who, after reconciliation with the king of Abyssinia, took rulership over Yemen, and later on, deployed his soldiers to demolish Al-Kaaba. And hence, he and his soldiers came to be known as the Men of the Elephant. After the elephant incident, the people of Yemen under the leadership of Madikarib bin Saifdu Yazin al-Himyari, and through Persian assistance, revolted against the Abyssinian Ethiopian invaders, restored independence and appointed Madikarib as their king. However, Madikarib was assassinated by an Abyssinian Ethiopian who used to have him around for service and protection. The family of Duyazin was thus deprived of royalty forever. Kisra, the Persian king, appointed a Persian ruler over Sana'a, and thus made Yemen a Persian colony. Persian rulers maintained rulership of Yemen until Badr, the last of them, embraced Islam in 638 AD, thus terminating the Persian domain over Yemen. Rulership in Hira, ever since Korosh the Great 557 to 529 BC, united the Persians. They ruled Iraq and its neighborhood, but nobody could shake off their authority until Alexander the Great vanquished their king Dara I and thus subdued the Persians in 326 BC. Persian lands were thenceforth divided and ruled by kings known as the kings of sects, an era which lasted until 230 AD. Meanwhile, the Catanians occupied some Iraqi territories, and were later followed by some Adnanians who managed to share some parts of Mesopotamia with them. The Persians, under the leadership of Ardashir, who had established the Sasanian state in 226 AD, regained enough unity and power to subdue the Arabs living in the vicinity of their kingdom, and force Qadar to leave for Syria, leaving the people of Hira and Anbar under the Persian domain. During the time of Ardashir, Juzaima al-Wada exercised rulership over Hira, Rabia and Mudar, and Mesopotamia. Ardashir had reckoned that it was impossible for him to rule the Arabs directly, and prevent them from attacking his borders, unless he appointed as king one of them who enjoyed support and power of his tribe. He had also seen that he could make use of them against the Byzantine kings who always used to harass him. At the same time, the Arabs of Iraq could face the Arabs. 15. Msa knew of Syria, who were in the hold of Byzantine kings. However, he deemed it fit to keep a Persian battalion under command of the king of Hira to be used against those Arabs who might rebel against him. After the death of Juzaima around 268 AD, Amr bin Adi bin Nasr al-Lakhmi was appointed as king by the Persian king Sabor bin Ardashir. Amr was the first of the Lakhmi kings who ruled Hira until the Persians appointed Qabas bin Fairuz, in whose reign appeared someone called Mazdak, who called for dissoluteness in social life. Qabas, and many of his subjects, embraced Mazdak's religion, and even called upon the king of Hira, al-Munzir bin Ma as-Sama, to follow after. When the latter, because of his pride and self-respect, rejected their orders, Qabas discharged him and nominated Harith bin bin Hajar al-Kindi, who had accepted the Mazdaki doctrine. No sooner did Kisra Anushirwan succeed Qabas than he, due to hatred of Mazdak's philosophy, killed Mazdak and many of his followers, restored Munzir to the throne of Hira, and gave orders to summon under arrest Harith, who sought refuge with Al-Qub tribe where he spent the rest of his life. Sons of al-Munzir bin Ma as-Sama maintained kingship a long time until a Numan bin al-Munzir took over. Because of a calumny borne by Zayd bin Adi al-Abadi, the Persian king got angry with Numan and summoned him to his palace. Numan went secretly to Hani bin Masud, chief of Shaiban tribe, and left his wealth and family under the latter's protection, and then presented himself before the Persian king, who immediately threw him into prison where he perished. Kisra then appointed Ayas bin Qubaysa Atayi as king of Hira. Ayas was ordered to tell Hani bin Masud to deliver Numan's charge up to Kisra. no sooner than had the Persian king received the fanatically motivated rejection on the part of the Arab chief. He declared war against the tribe of Shayban, and mobilized his troops and warriors, under the leadership of King Ayas, to a place called Dekar, which witnessed a most furious battle, wherein the Persians were severely routed by the Arabs for the first time in history. That was very soon after the birth of Prophet Muhammad, Pubba, 8 months after Ayas bin Qabazar's rise to power over Hira. After Ayas, a Persian ruler was appointed over Hira, but in 632 AD, the authority there returned to the family of Lukum when al-Munzir al-Marur took over. Hardly had the latter's reign lasted for 8 months when Khalid bin al-Walid fell upon him with Muslim soldiers. Hazrat Tariq al-Umam al-Islamiyya, 129-32. Rulership in geographical Syria. In the process of the tribal emigrations, some septs of Qudar reached the borders of Syria, where they settled down. They belonged to the family of Sulay bin Halwan, of whose offspring were the sons of Dujam bin Sulay known as Ad-Dujaima. Such septs of Qudar were used by the Byzantines in the defense of the Byzantine borders against both Arab Bedouin raiders and the Persians, and enjoyed autonomy for a considerable phase of time which is said to have lasted for the whole 2nd century AD. One of their most famous kings was Ziyad bin al-Habula. Their authority, however, came to an end upon defeat by the Ghassanides, who were consequently granted the proxy rulership over the Arabs of Syria, and had Dumat al-Jandal as their headquarters, which lasted until the Battle of Yarmouk in the year 13 AH. Their last. 16. MSA New. King Jabala bin al-Ayhum embraced Islam during the reign of the chief of believers, Umar bin al-Khattab R. Hazrat Tariq al-Umam al-Islamiyya 134th, Tariq al-Quran 280-82. Rulership in Hijaz. Ismail RWS administered authority over Makkah, as well as custodianship of the holy sanctuary throughout his lifetime. Upon his death, at the age of 137, 2 of his sons, Nabet and Kedar, succeeded him. Later on, their maternal grandfather, Mudad bin Amr al-Juhumi took over, thus transferring rulership over Makkah to the tribe of Juhum, preserving a venerable position. Though very little authority for Ishmael's sons, due to their father's exploits in building the holy sanctuary, a position they held until the decline of the tribe of Juhum shortly before the rise of Bukhtanasar. Ibn Hisham 111th. The political role of the Adnanides had begun to gain firmer grounds in Makkah, which could be clearly attested by the fact that upon Bukhtanasar's first invasion of the Arabs in Dati-Aku, the leader of the Arabs was not from Juhum. Kalb Jazirat al-Arab, p. 230. Upon Bukhtanasar's second invasion in 587 BC, however, the Adnanides were frightened out to Yemen, while Burmir and Nabi fled to Syria with Ma'ad. But when Bukhtanasar's pressure lessened, Ma'ad returned to Makkah to find none of the tribe of Juhum except Jersham bin Jalhama, whose daughter Mu'ana was given to Ma'ad as wife, who later had a son by him named Nizar. Rahmat ul-lil Alameen, 248. On account of difficult living conditions and destitution prevalent in Makkah, the tribe of Juhum began to ill-treat visitors of the holy sanctuary and extort its funds, which aroused resentment and hatred of the Adnanides sons of Bakr bin Abd Munaf bin Kinana, who, with the help of the tribe of Khuzar that had come to settle in a neighboring area called Mara Zaran, invaded Juhum and frightened them out of Makkah, leaving rulership to Qudar in the middle of the 2nd century AD. Upon leaving Makkah, Juhum filled up the well of Zamzam, leveled its place, and buried a great many things in it. Amr bin al-Harith bin Mudad al-Juhumi was reported by Ibn Ishaq, the well-known historian, to have buried the 2 gold deer together with the black stone, as well as a lot of jewelry and swords in Zamzam, prior to their sorrowful escape to Yemen. Ibn Hisham, 114,115. Ishmael's epoch is estimated to have lasted for 20 centuries BC, which means that Jurhum stayed in Makkah for 21 centuries and held rulership there for about 20 centuries. Upon defeat of Jurhum, the tribe of Khuza'ah monopolized rulership over Makkah. Mudar tribes, however, enjoyed 3 privileges. The first, leading pilgrims from Arafat to Muzdalifah, and then from Mina to the Aqaba stoning pillar. This was the authority of the family of Al-Gawth bin Murrah, one of the septs of Elias bin Mudar, who were called Sofa. This privilege meant that the pilgrims were not allowed to throw stones at Al-Aqaba until one of the Sofa 17 MSA knew men did that. When they had finished stoning and wanted to leave the valley of Mina, Sofa men stood on the 2 sides of Al-Aqaba, and nobody would pass that position until the men of Sofa passed and cleared the way for the pilgrims. When Sofa perished, the family of Sa'd bin Zayd Manat from Tamim tribe took over. The second, Al-Ifada, leaving for Mina after Muzdalifah on sacrifice morning, and this was the responsibility of the family of Adwan. The third, deferment of the sacred months, and this was the responsibility of the family of Tamim bin Adi from Bani Kinana. Khuza'ah's reign in Makkah lasted for 300 years, during which the Adnanides spread all over Najd and the sides of Bahrain and Iraq, while small septs of Quraysh remained on the sides of Makkah. They were Halul, Haram, and some families of Kinana. They enjoyed no privileges in Makkah or in the sacred house until the appearance of Qusay bin Kilab, whose father is said to have died when he was still a baby, and whose mother was subsequently married to Rabi'a bin Haram. From the tribe of Bani Udra, Rabi'a took his wife and her baby to his homeland on the borders of Syria. When Qusay became a young man, he returned to Makkah, which was ruled by Halil bin Habshah from Khuza'ah, who gave Qusay his daughter, Hubba, as wife. After Halil's death, a war between Khuza'ah and Quraysh broke out and resulted in Qusay's taking hold of Makkah and the sacred house. Ibn Hisham. The reasons of this war have been illustrated in 3 versions. The first, having noticed the spread of his offspring, increase of his property and exalt of his honor after Halil's death, Qusay found himself more entitled to shoulder responsibility of rulership over Makkah and custodianship of the sacred house than the tribes of Khuza'ah and Bani Bakr. He also advocated that Quraysh were the chiefs of Ishmael's descendants. Therefore he consulted some men from Quraysh and Kinana concerning his desire to evacuate Khuza'ah and Bani Bakr from Makkah. They took a liking to his opinion and supported him. The second, Khuza'ah claimed that Halil requested Qusay to hold custodianship of Al-Kaaba and rulership over Makkah after his death. The third, Halil gave the right of Al-Kaaba service to his daughter Hubba, and appointed Abu Gabshan al-Khuzai to function as her agent whereof. Upon Halil's death, Qusay bought this right for a leather bag of wine, which aroused dissatisfaction among the men of Khuza'ah, and they tried to keep the custodianship of the sacred house away from Qusay. The latter, however, with the help of Quraysh and Kinana, managed to take over and even to expel Khuza'ah completely from Makkah. Rahmat-ul lil Alameen 255. Whatever the truth might have been, the whole affair resulted in the deprivation of Sofa of their privileges, previously mentioned, evacuation of Khuza'ah and Bakr from Makkah, and transfer of rulership over Makkah and custodianship of the holy sanctuary to Qusay. After fierce wars between Qusay and Khuza'ah inflicting heavy casualties on both sides, reconciliation and then arbitration of Ya'mur bin Auf from the tribe of Bakr, whose judgment entailed eligibility of Qusay's rulership over 18 Msa New, Makkah, and custodianship of the sacred house. Qusay's irresponsibility for Khuza'ah's bloodshed and imposition of blood money on Khuza'ah. Qusay's reign over Makkah and the sacred house began in 440 AD and allowed him, and Quraysh afterwards, absolute rulership over Makkah and undisputed custodianship of the sacred house to which Arabs from all over Arabia came to pay homage. Qusay brought his kinspeople to Makkah and allocated it to them, allowing Quraysh some dwellings there. An-Nusra, the families of Safwan, Adwan, Murabin, Awf preserved the same rights they used to enjoy before his arrival. Ibn Hisham. A significant achievement credited to Qusay was the establishment of a Nadwa house, an assembly house, on the northern side of Al-Kaaba Mosque, to serve as a meeting place for Quraysh. This very house had benefited Quraysh a lot, because it secured unity of opinions amongst them and cordial solution to their problem. Ibn Hisham, Akhbar al-Kiram, p. 152. Qusay, however, enjoyed the following privileges of leadership and honor. 1. Presiding over a Nadwa house meetings, where consultations relating to serious issues were conducted, and marriage contracts were announced. 2. The standard, he monopolized in his hand issues relevant to war launching. 3. Doorkeeping of Al-Kaaba, he was the only one eligible to open its gate, and was responsible for its service and protection. 4. Providing water for the pilgrims, this means that he used to fill basins, sweetened by dates and raisins for the pilgrims to drink. 5. Feeding pilgrims, this means making food for pilgrims who could not afford it. Qusay even imposed on Quraysh annual land tax, paid at the season of pilgrimage, for food. Ibn Hisham, 130th. It is noteworthy, however, that Qusay singled out Abd Manaf, a son of his, for honor and prestige, though he was not his eldest son, Abd Ad-Dar was, and entrusted him with such responsibilities as chairing of a Nadwa house, the standard, the doorkeeping of Al-Kaaba, providing water and food for pilgrims. Due to the fact that Qusay's deeds were regarded as unquestionable and his orders inviolable, his death gave no rise to conflicts among his sons, but it later did among his grandchildren. For no sooner than Abd Manaf had died, his sons began to have rows with their cousins, sons of Abd Ad-Dar, which would have given rise to dissension and fighting among the whole tribe of Quraysh, had it not been for a peace treaty whereby posts were reallocated so as to preserve feeding and providing water for pilgrims for the sons of Abd Manaf, while a Nadwa house, the flag and the doorkeeping of Al-Kaaba were maintained for the sons of Abd Ad-Dar. The sons of Abd Manaf, however, cast the lot for their charge, and consequently left the charge of food and water giving to Hashim bin Abd Manaf, upon whose death the charge was taken over by a brother of his called Al-Muttalib bin Abd Manaf, and afterwards by Abd al-Muttalib bin Hashim, the Prophet's grandfather, whose sons assumed this position until the rise of Islam, during which Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib was in charge. Ibn Hisham, 129th to 179. 19. Msa Niu. Many other posts were distributed among people of Quraysh for establishing the pillars of a new democratic petite state, with government offices and councils similar to those of today. Enlisted as follows are some of these posts. 1. Casting the lots for the idols was allocated to Bani Juma. 2. Noting of offers and sacrifices, settlement of disputes and relevant issues were to lie in the hands of Bani Sam. 3. Consultation was to go to Bani Asad. 4. Organization of blood money and fines was with Bani Taim. 5. Bearing the national banner was with Bani Umayyah. 6. The military institute, footmen and cavalry would be Bani Makhzum's responsibility. 7. Bani Adi would function as foreign mediators. Tariq Ard al-Quran 210. 106. Rulership in Pan-Arabia. We have previously mentioned the Qahtanide and Adnanide emigrations and division of Arabia between these two tribes. Those tribes dwelling near Hira were subordinate to the Arabian king of Hira, while those dwelling in the Syrian semi-desert were under domain of the Arabian Ghassanide king. A sort of dependency that was in reality formal rather than actual. However, those living in the Hindu deserts enjoyed full autonomy. These tribes in fact had heads chosen by the whole tribe, which was a demi-government based on tribal solidarity and collective interests in defense of land and property. Heads of tribes enjoyed dictatorial privileges similar to those of kings, and were rendered full obedience and subordination in both war and peace. Rivalry among cousins for rulership, however, often drove them to outdo one another in entertaining guests, affecting generosity, wisdom, and chivalry for the sole purpose of outranking their rivals, and gaining fame among people, especially poets who were the official spokesman at the time. Heads of tribes and masters had special claims to spoils of war, such as the quarter of the spoils, whatever he chose for himself, or found on his way back, or even the remaining indivisible spoils. The political situation. The three Arab regions adjacent to foreigners suffered great weakness and inferiority. The people there were either masters or slaves, rulers or subordinates. Masters, especially the foreigners, had claim to every advantage. Slaves had nothing but responsibilities to shoulder. In other words, arbitrary autocratic rulership brought about encroachment on the rights of subordinates, ignorance, oppression, iniquity, injustice and hardship, and turning them into people groping in darkness and ignorance. Viz. Fertile land which rendered its fruits to the rulers and men of power to extravagantly dissipate on their pleasures and enjoyments, whims and desires, tyranny and aggression. The tribes living near these regions were fluctuating. 20. MSA Nayu. Between Syria and Iraq, whereas those living inside Arabia were disunited and governed by tribal conflicts and racial and religious disputes. They had neither a king to sustain their independence, nor a supporter to seek advice from, or depend upon, in hardships. The rulers of Hijaz, however, were greatly esteemed and respected by the Arabs, and were considered as rulers and servants of the religious center. Rulership of Hijaz was, in fact, a mixture of secular and official precedents, as well as religious leadership. They ruled among the Arabs in the name of religious leadership, and always monopolized the custodianship of the holy sanctuary and its neighborhood. They looked after the interests of Al-Kaaba visitors, and were in charge of putting Abraham's code into effect. They even had such offices and departments like those of the parliaments of today. However, they were too weak to carry the heavy burden, as this evidently came to light during the Abyssinian Ethiopian invasion.